Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. March 23rd, 2023, in the year of our Lord, my Lord, your Lord, somebody's Lord. It is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here live on the Bettor Sports Network. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You know me from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, this show right now, which we're bringing to you for the next 2 hours. As a reminder, if you're looking for some action right now, you can win $25,000 in the 2023 FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, just $125 to join. And then if you were like, oh, Bulky, I'd love to play that, but I like Superflex. Don't worry. We got a Superflex tournament, the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament. $35 to enter that. You can still win $5,000 at myffpc.com. Here's the slant on these contests. They're going to run up until the start of the NFL draft. So nobody's drafting in May, June, August, September, whatever. You're drafting against everybody who's been drafting since January, and that will draft until the start of the NFL draft. Best ball slim rules, no kickers, no defenses, 20-round draft, 14-week regular season, and then single-week elimination starting in week 15 before we crown a champion after week 17. Drafts are available right now, 30-second clock, 60-second clock, 2-hour clock, 6-hour clock, whatever you want to do. That's all at myffpc.com. While you're there, we have a ton, and I can't emphasize this enough. It's about 5 weeks until the start of the NFL draft. We have the best prices on Dynasty Orphans that we have ever had in the history of the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Right now, you could pick up $77 entry, $250 entry, $500, $750, $1,250, $2,500 for as low as $1. Yeah, we have $1 Dynasty Orphans available at myffpc.com. Check that out and register for your league there today. And some of these teams are loaded for bear. They're ready to compete right now, and you can get them for as little as $1. Now, I'm probably burying the lead, but we announced earlier last week that we have partnered with Fantasy Pros, a division of fantasy football that our co-host is part of tonight. You can win $1 million. $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, the inaugural Fantasy Pros Championship, at just a $350 entry fee. We have those drafts going on right now at myffpc.com. You can register right now. Just $350 to enter. It's a $6 million plus prize pool, and you can win $1 million with the Fantasy Pros Championship. Register now. And by the way, if you register by June 1st and you draft your teams by June 15th, you're going to get a free $35 FFPC credit. Free $35 credit, and we're going to do that up to 3 times. In other words, if you register for the Fantasy Pros Championship before June 1st and draft before June 15th, you will do, if you do that up to 3 times, you're going to get 3 free $35 credits applied to your account. That's $105 of free teams. Get 3 credits right now. myffpc.com. Register for the Fantasy Pros Championship. Want to thank our producer, Bennett Carroll, who is holding it down tonight. And I want to welcome in my guest co-host for this evening. You know him from his expert rankings over at Fantasy Pros, and you know him now from all the stuff he's been doing over at DraftSharks.com, at DraftSharks on Twitter. Everything that he produces, you can check out at Herms NFL on Twitter. It is CH Herms. Herms, welcome in, and so glad to be spending the next 2 hours with you, man.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. This is tremendous. We are in such a fun part of the football calendar too. So many fun things to talk about. I can't wait. I cannot wait to spend this time talking about the news.
I think that when we look at the NFL calendar, as you just alluded to, everybody gets super excited for free agency season. Everybody gets excited for NFL draft season. And we're kind of in the midst of all that right now. But the first wave of free agency is done. Sometimes for dynasty purposes, and Herms, I know you play a lot of dynasty. Sometimes for dynasty purposes, the second wave of trades and free agency is a little bit more exciting than the first wave. This was kind of a weak free agency class. And I think a lot of people will tell you, well, if the player is important to the team, they're going to be they're going to not even reach free agency. They're going to be extended by their current teams. The guys that get to free agency are the guys that we don't necessarily care about because they're not the biggest movers and shakers in the NFL and in high stakes fantasy football. But I think the second wave, as far as we look at like rookie drafts, especially in the FFPC with the dynasty, including the dynasty rookie drafts, including not only rookies, but free agents. I think this is really compelling what we have going on right now because it's a non-talked about entity. People don't necessarily care about McCole Hardman, Isaiah McKenzie, Damian Harris, but we're going to get into it tonight. And I want to lead things off with probably the biggest trade we've seen in the last week. And it was a trade that was done, an all-Texas trade between the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. The Cowboys get Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. They give up a 2023 fifth-round pick and a 2024 sixth-round pick. And you say, well, Balky, that's not a whole lot to give up for Brandon Cooks. Well, keep in mind, there was a contract attached to this. Now, Cooks was in Houston the last 3 years. He had 2 1,000-yard seasons in the last 3 years. He went 11, 38, and 1 as a Texan. It was bad. And he's deciding to move on to greener pastures. He will turn 30 years old this season. And whoever acquired him in a trade, which ended up being the Cowboys, was going to have to take on the $26 million he was set to earn in 2023. That's just 1 year of $26 million. The Cowboys needed some help. You saw Michael Gallup last year in his first year coming off the ACL, right? It wasn't great. And, coming off the ACL, maybe you're not going to be great in year one. But now the Cowboys move on. They know what they have in Gallup. They decide to go out and make the move for Brandon Cooks, not only to give up that draft capital, but to take on his salary as well. CeeDee Lamb was awesome. Outside of that, in Dallas, it wasn't great. Dalton Schultz is gone. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But now there's a lot of things to pick apart here. But let's take it at face value right away. Brandon Cooks is now a Cowboy. He's the second banana to CeeDee Lamb. Your thoughts from Brandon Cooks, not only from a redraft perspective, Herms, but from a dynasty perspective as well.
I mean, it's interesting to see Brandon Cooks end up on what I believe is like his 5th or 6th team or something so far in his career. A guy that good that is consistently produced wherever he's gone. I mean, I'm always going to be excited about Brandon Cooks because even like you were saying before, even in a lesser situation in Houston, he still found a way to be able to produce at a pretty high level for your fantasy teams. And now going over to play with Dak Prescott in that offense, I mean, it should end up being pretty solid. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what happens now that, the offensive coordinator has moved on, whose name escapes me at the what was
for the Cowboys?
Yeah, what?
It's going to be Mr. Run the Football. I'm going to look it up right now. It's not Scott Linehan. It's a guy that the Seahawks had. God, everybody in the Better Sports
Brian
is going crazy.
Schottenheimer.
Yeah,
there we go.
Schottenheimer. I knew we'd figure it out. Yes, that's who it is.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how the offense kind of, does as far as that goes, because it's not going to be the same offense that we've seen in the last few years. But generally speaking, we've seen Dak Prescott have the ability to support multiple fantasy viable pass catchers. This is definitely an ideal situation where, like you were talking about before, I was never really that particularly big on Michael Gallup in the first place anyway. Coming off the injury, didn't look that great. Like, the opportunity is definitely there for him, and without Dalton Schultz, but like you said, we'll talk more about that later. But like, dude, I'm here for it. I love Brandon Cooks. Every year, every draft, he would always just fall super far, always going to be a value, but you know exactly what you're getting out of it. So pretty much any format, dynasty, redraft, the same principle applies. Nobody ever thinks about Brandon Cooks until you look at your team and you're like, I could use a little bit of something, but I don't really want to trade too much. What type of player could I go out and acquire? The answer is always Brandon Cooks.
I'll tell you this right now. There are a lot of high-stakes players out there. If high-stakes fantasy football players, Herms, had a social media network to themselves and would develop their own memes, the meme right now would be Tyler Lockett, because you can pretty much, if you want Tyler Lockett, you will acquire him if you want. And Brandon Cooks, I feel like, is a poor man's Tyler Lockett at this point, right? Because he's coming up on 30 years old. He's not going to be the lead receiver on his team. You can get him for a song at this point. And in Dynasty, like, if you're one player away or maybe a couple of players away, parting with a high second-round pick or a late first-round pick for Brandon Cooks might be in your best interest to do that right now. I look at the Cooks thing is, well, okay, we've unpacked it from Cook's perspective. Let's get into the CeeDee Lamb perspective. this does not have any effect on what you think Lamb is going to do in 2023, right?
Probably not. I mean, especially if they continue to cycle in CeeDee Lamb, kind of lining up on the outside, lining up on the inside, kind of as he did, a little bit earlier in his career. I mean, there's definitely going to be a void just in terms of how the offense will schematically function without a Dalton Schultz. Maybe Jake Ferguson, currently the tight end one on the roster, might be something to consider there. But I mean, CeeDee Lamb has the versatility as a receiver to be able to function, in the intermediate, do all that type of stuff, maybe do some of that kind of mop-up duty. But I don't know, CeeDee Lamb he's versatile and talented enough that I'm not particularly worried about anything that could happen for him.
We know that Brandon Cooks will be in Dallas. What we don't know is who is going to replace him as the number one receiver in Houston. There are some options there, right? So you have John Mechie, the guy from Alabama who missed his rookie season because of, I believe it was leukemia, right? He didn't even play at all. You have Amari Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers cast off. You have Robert Woods, a guy who's at the tail end of his career, but always been a pretty good possession guy. They signed him. And you also have Noah Brown, formerly of the Cowboys, now the Texans, and Nico Collins, who I believe is in his third year out of Michigan. He is going to be there as well. Herms, if there is a Texans receiver you're targeting, you're not going to have to pay up for any of these guys. Who's your favorite Texans receiver now that Cooks is no longer there?
Of the players currently on the roster, probably Nico Collins, just because, I mean, we saw certain flashes of that toward the end of last year before he got hurt with whatever injury kept him out for the last several games. But, I mean, if I'm not a big fan of targeting, kind of the bigger body X receivers in fantasy unless we know that they're going to be like the upper echelon type talents that can come down with a lot of those 50-50 balls. I don't know that Nico Collins is quite in that area for now, but whoever they draft at number 2, or maybe if they move up to number 1, who knows? They're going to have an actual quarterback now, which is going to be super fun. So, I mean, I could definitely see a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or something, find ways to just lob those balls downfield and have him go up for it. But, everybody else you mentioned, they're either old or they're just, I mean, Amari Rodgers, solid special teams contributions. He'll be important for the Texans' real life football team, but I can't imagine he'll do much for our fantasy teams at all. But there's also a halfway decent chance that the receiver you really want on the Texans isn't on the roster yet, because who knows what they do with that second picking at 12. I mean, I know DeMeco Ryans' new head coach hire might want to go on the defensive side of the ball with that second pick to try to shore up things on that side. But if they want to pair whatever young quarterback they take with a receiver, that could be interesting. But yeah, as far as the people currently there, it's Nico Collins.
If they do decide to go receiver there, and we'll get into him a little bit later on, you think Jackson Smith and Jigba is the pick at 12 then for Houston? Assuming he's there.
Well, look, I mean, if Carolina goes Bryce Young number 1, CJ Stroud falls right into their lap there. I mean, think about reuniting the Ohio State Buckeyes. Come on, let's do it.
And then they stink this year, and they get Marvin Harrison in the top 10 next year. This could be epic. Or, and bear with me on this, what if Ezekiel Elliott can't find a home? He goes to Houston to go with Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce, as some also ran, and Urban Meyer is hired as a special assistant. It's all coming together here for the Buckeyes in the Buckeyes South in Houston. That would be tremendous. Okay, so I think we spent enough time on that. Let's get into Adam Thielen going to the Carolina Panthers. He leaves Kirk Cousins' unvaccinated arm in Minnesota to go to, we think, CJ Stroud in Carolina. We don't know for sure. There was some memes circulating around social media about Frank Reich looking at CJ Stroud when they met with him, and it was it's like the fantasy football players rom-com, right? When we see Frank Reich looking at CJ Stroud. We get it, okay? Adam Thielen is in Carolina. It's a 3-year, $25 million contract. He gets $14 million guarantees. He is going to turn 33 years old this year. And there is nobody on that depth chart after DJ Moore goes to Chicago in that trade for the number 1 overall pick. Yes, they have Terrace Marshall. Okay, whatever. But Frank Reich is going to get a red zone receiver who scored 30 touchdowns in his last 3 years in Minnesota. He is going to get a lot of targets there. May not be the most efficient with them, He could have. I think I was listening to Cecil Lammy and Sigmund Bloom from Football Guys talk about this. It could be a 90 catch for 700 yards type season. The Panthers have also talked to DJ Chark about potentially bringing him on. Carolina's obviously going to bring in weapons for CJ Stroud or whoever they draft. But I want to get your thoughts here on Adam Thielen, because as I look at the never too early best ball, or I take it back, the Fantasy Pros Players Championship, which you can register for at myffpc.com. I look at fantasymojo.com's ADP of the Fantasy Pros Championship. And Adam Thielen, over the course of 7 drafts, this has been going on over the last 3 weeks, wide receiver 68. He's going in the 14th round, Herms. As early as the early 11th. I still think he's a bargain there right now. We have to separate age here and output, right? Because I think, yes, he's old. He is not going to be, the ceiling is definitely low. But the floor is very high. And I think when you look at a guy who will climb into the 9th or 10th round because of how many targets he's going to see, he's not going to be a world beater, and maybe you want to stay away from him in best ball tournaments like the Never Too Early tournament that's going on with the FFPC right now. But in a managed league like the Fantasy Pros Championship, or when the FFPC main event drafts get rolling here in late July and early August, whatever it is, Adam Thielen at wide receiver 68 in the 9th or 10th round, man, you can do a lot worse than that. I think he's being undervalued right now.
I completely agree. And, I think when the news came out that he signed this contract, people look at, 3 years. Oh, but look at how old he is. Blah, blah. It's like, no. We don't have to worry about what's going to happen in 2024 and 2025 right now. We only have to worry about what's happening in 2023. And for 2023, they don't have a lot of draft capital to work with in Carolina because they shoveled it all to Chicago to move up to number 1 to get the quarterback. So it's going to be a while until they can fill out the offense around whatever quarterback they take. And right now, even if the DJ Chark domino falls, the types of the 2 weapons that they're going to, whoever they are at quarterback, that they're going to have is going to be Thielen and Chark. Now, the backfield's definitely going to be interesting with Miles Sanders. I mean, he has some penchant for receiving, more so earlier in his career than the last couple of years. That'll be, a certain fun little dump off, thing for them to work with. But generally speaking, Thielen's going to be the safest veteran option. We're going to get more of the same that we saw over the last couple years in Minnesota. People always talk about the touchdown regression and all that. It's like, yeah, I mean, it was bound to regress at some point, but for some reason, Adam Thielen just consistently is an outlier. Like you said, he just is a red zone guy. He just does come down with these touchdowns. I can't explain how it works. I don't have an algorithm that can figure it out, but it just happens. It just does. So you look at what they have currently on the roster, the resources they have to make it any better, and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess it's Adam Thielen season.
But that has never been uttered ever, Adam Thielen season. But it is. You're right. And the other thing to keep in mind, and I don't know where you fall in on this as we look at this from a deeper perspective, the AFC, I beg your pardon, the NFC South probably not going to be great again this year. We don't know what's going on in Tampa. New Orleans, yeah, they got Derek Carr. They're still going to have salary cap issues there. Carolina has the number 1 overall pick, and they have some issues there. And you look at Atlanta, still trying to figure things out. I don't want to say that division is going to be full of shootouts this year, but I always say there's a non-zero chance of anything. And I could see a lot of big-time shootouts in that division. And if that's the case, or if Carolina is going out of division and playing catch-up, who is a rookie receiver going to count on there? Tommy Tremble, okay, maybe Ian Thomas, whatever. But Adam Thielen in the slot, a guy who has proven himself in that position over the course of the better part of a decade in Carolina. I think there's a lot to like there with Thielen, and there's a lot to love there when you consider what his ADP is right now, and you get him in the 9th, 10th round. That makes a lot of sense for me. Until that draft value or that ADP spikes, I'm going to be all over Thielen at that point. And once he gets up to the 7th, 8th round, then we can revisit whether he's a value or not. But right now, and if you're drafting right now in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament or the Fantasy Pros Championship, he is a value right now. Let's get in to what the Jets have been doing over the course of the last few days. So number 1, and we're going to go in non-chronological order here, Ian Rappaport reported that the Cleveland Browns traded their 2023 pick, which is number 42 in the NFL draft this year, to the New York Jets in exchange for a 2023 third-round pick and Elijah Moore. Now, this was after the Jets already acquired Mecole Hardman, which we'll get into in a little bit. Corey Davis probably will not be a member of the Jets next season. He's going to be cut. People talk about, oh, he's a trade chip in this Packers-Rodgers thing. No, I mean, that dude is – they can save almost $11 million on the cap with a less than a $1 million dead cap hit. They can easily cut him. He doesn't have to be part of the Packers trade. We'll get into that in a little bit. But Elijah Moore, over 2 years, he's caught 80 balls, 984 yards, and 6 touchdowns, but only 7 yards per target and 1.23 yards per route run while he was with the Jets. Now, as a disclaimer, a lot of that was with Zach Wilson, but a lot of it wasn't with Zach Wilson as well. In fact, when the Jets had the opportunity to deploy him last season, they chose not to, and he was on the bench so much that he requested a trade or release, did Elijah Moore from the New York Jets. He should be starting in Cleveland, assuming the Browns don't acquire DeAndre Hopkins, which I don't think happens. They're going to have Amari Cooper. Now they're going to have Elijah Moore. Now, Herms, as I look at this in the Fantasy Pros Championship ADP, Elijah Moore, wide receiver 55 at the end of the 11th round. Anytime we have news break like this, there's always going to be a bump of this player moving up around maybe 2 rounds here. But I think even if he moves up from the 9th round, there is some league-winning chutzpah to Elijah Moore this year. And I think this is the type of player when you're trying to beat out hundreds or thousands of other teams, when you only have to soak a 9th-round pick into this guy at this point, he makes some sense here.
Yeah, and I think as long as he stays around that range, it's going to be a good idea. But I know that Elijah Moore is one of those players that kind of has a cult following in the fantasy community. At least I see that a lot on Twitter. There are a lot of people that are super enthusiastic about him, and they'll cite that stretch, I think, from week 7 to week 14 or whatever it was in his rookie season where he was the wide receiver 3 overall in PPR, and he was doing that with Mike White and Joe Flacco and so I mean,
and Joe Namath. Right.
Exactly.
And Browning Nagel and all these guys, Bennett would know this. Like this Browning Nagel's probably before your time, but all these guys, Chad Pennington is another guy that Elijah Moore was catching passes from. It was insane. It was great. Ken O'Brien. It was fantastic.
Yes. As long as you don't end up in, drafts with those people, then you should probably be able to get Elijah Moore at a pretty, decent price. And I think about how he's going to fit in an offense like with Cleveland. Assuming that Deshaun Watson remembers how to play football, that it's probably going to work out pretty well, because the version of Deshaun Watson we saw last year was terrible, absolutely horrible. But we just think about, like you said, we already have Amari Cooper. No offense to Donovan Peoples-Jones, but in terms of like the role that he can play in an NFL team, he's pretty limited. He's the X guy that's just going to run super far upfield, and if the ball gets bombed and it lands in his hands, cool. If not, whatever. Elijah Moore seems like it'll probably be, he'll be more versatile for that offense for sure. It's going to be difficult for me to figure out how I feel about his target share in relation to Cooper, and also David Njoku, lest we forget, is going to be there, super impactful last year for, decent stretches. But like all in all, I think it's good to see him get an opportunity to kind of restart, refresh, and, get his mind clear out of New York.
I think that's David Njoku's middle name, lest we forget, right? David, lest we forget Njoku. I think that's what it is. So I want to bring up a conspiracy theory. Herms, I don't know if you know this, but I'm located in Northeast Wisconsin. I'm a couple of Aaron Rodgers Hail Marys southwest of Green Bay here in gorgeous Appleton, Wisconsin. I have a conspiracy theory about Elijah Moore. This is a player before this whole Aaron Rodgers to the Jets thing was a thing. He was rumored to be coming to Green Bay last year. It never happened. Now we know that Aaron Rodgers is all but assured to end up in New York as a member of the Jets this year. And what do the Jets do? They offload Elijah Moore to a different team, and he's not going to be in New York with Aaron Rodgers. I almost think that Aaron Rodgers is the reason that Elijah Moore never became a Packer, because this is a guy that had an 8.69 relative athletic score at the combine, ran a 4.35 40. These are numbers that the Packers crave in the first 2 rounds. Elijah Moore was a 2nd-round pick. Now he is going to be in Cleveland as opposed to Green Bay. I wonder if this is a situation where Packers GM Aaron Rodgers kept Elijah Moore out of Green Bay, and now Jets GM Aaron Rodgers is keeping Elijah Moore out of New York to make sure he's not being thrown to by him at all. And we have a crowded situation in New York right now. We have a situation where Elijah Moore is probably out. Elijah Moore for sure out. Corey Davis is not going to be a member of the Jets going forward. I already explained how it's a minimal dead cap hit, and it's a huge cap savings for the Jets just to cut him. Now it's going to be Alan Lazard. It's going to be Garrett Wilson. It's going to be potentially Odell Beckham, right? In that room this year, we'll see what happens. It seems like Rodgers wants him there. But it's a very crowded room, and now Elijah Moore goes to Cleveland. Who replaces Elijah Moore? It certainly seems that it's going to be Mecole Hardman, who was signed by the Jets 1 year, $6.5 million, which is a little bit more than I expected him to get. So if this guy was on the grocery list for Aaron Rodgers, then it makes sense that this speed element was added to the Jets. You have a situation now where the Jets can deploy Mecole Hardman as a speed merchant down the field. I don't know what he offers other than that. For fantasy purposes, I would not touch him in a managed league, Herms, like the Fantasy Pros Championship, in a like the Never Too Early Best Ball tournament going on with the FFPC. I get it because there's some spike week potential here. I don't necessarily know what to expect from a guy like Hardman. So from the fantasy aspect, yes, even though I've never been a Hardman guy, I'm willing to take some chances on him for that spike week potential and the fact that maybe he develops into a 10, 11 touchdown guy this year with Aaron Rodgers, and maybe they're all on bombs, but those are the types of weeks that help you out in best ball.
That's true. I mean, kind of like you're alluding to, it's definitely a great move for the Jets themselves just to be able to have that element to the offense. It's always good anytime you can have that sort of field stretching aspect of things. I mean, like, I know the Chargers are a team that really wish they probably would have had something like that last year. It's very important to have that dimension to take the top off of everything. But, going to the Jets, getting to work with formerly elite, maybe still elite, depending on who you ask, quarterback and Aaron Rodgers, that could be kind of fun.
He's formerly elite.
Yeah,
he's still very good, but he's not elite anymore.
Unless you ask him, I'm pretty sure he would
still.
That's
so like I don't necessarily want to delve into this rabbit hole, and I don't know how you fall in on this, but as far as players rating themselves or players telling you how hurt they actually are, or worse, how healthy they are, I don't ever take that kind of knowledge to heart, right? Because competitors at the highest level are always going to tell you they're the best. They're never going to tell you they're hurt. They're always going to tell you that they're playing at the top of their capabilities as far as health goes. So for me, when it comes to that, they make for good sound bites, right? But for fantasy purposes, I never manage my teams based on how the players themselves are rating themselves. And by the way, I'll interrupt myself and tell you this. I think that thumb injury for Aaron Rodgers was more serious than a lot of people let on last year, including himself, including Rodgers. So there's something to be said about that. So I think it's well within in the realm of possibilities for Aaron Rodgers to win an MVP in New York this year for the Jets. I don't think it's likely, but I definitely could see him having a big 2023 there.
Absolutely. I mean, like we saw, in smaller spurts at times last year, especially toward the end of the season, things really started to come together for the Packers. They kind of almost made that little run toward the end. Like, he still got it. It's just a matter of him being able to have the requisite type of talent around him. And, no offense to, guys like Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. I mean, they'll have fine NFL careers for sure, but Garrett Wilson? I mean, come on. Breece Hall in the backfield whenever he gets healthy. I mean, come on. These are dude, it's gonna be a fabulous time. And now, obviously, like we were talking about before, Mecole Hardman, that's gonna be super cool for sure. But dude, Aaron Rodgers, he's that boy. He's that boy. And also, any man that is going to go to a new place and try and succeed at the highest level, probably more out of spite than anything else, is a person that I will always bet on. Always bet on a person who is motivated by doing things out of spite.
Mm-hmm. I'm totally with you on that. I mean, look what happened And now we're going to, okay, disclaimer, we're going down the Aaron Rodgers rabbit hole here for a little bit. All right. So a couple of things on this. So number one, the last time Aaron Rodgers played out of spite was when Jordan Love was drafted by the Packers in 2020 as his heir apparent. What did he go out and do? He won the NFL MVP. And if that wasn't enough, he did it again the following year, right? Yeah. Which totally threw the Packers for a loop. And they gave him this huge contract, which has been kind of an albatross and probably the reason that only the Jets are interested in acquiring him right now. So that's number one. Number two, this is something my former co-host of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, Dave the Dizzle Gerzak, co-founder of the FFPC, has said, Aaron Rodgers is smarter. He believes Aaron Rodgers is smarter than the previous GMs and the previous front office people over at the Packers have been over the years. So it's difficult for Rodgers to wrap his head around what's going on there when he believes he's the smartest guy in the room. And quite frankly, he graduated from Cal. He's a smart guy. Brian Gutekunst is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, as a fellow graduate of the University of Wisconsin system here. And nobody's going to care about this. I'm going to rattle them off anyway. The UW Wisconsin system, La Crosse, Eau Claire, River Falls, Oshkosh. Like there's a ton of them here. Whitewater is another one. We're all part of the same system, right? I graduated from UW Oshkosh. Brian Gutekunst, the Packers GM, graduated from UW La Crosse. I get why Rodgers thinks he's smarter than Brian Gutekunst. I get it, okay? And that's fair. And maybe he is, maybe he's not. I don't know if that's the point. But here's the thing. Rodgers believes himself to be the smartest guy in the room. Why is this crucial? It's because of this. Herms, who is the second best quarterback and who is the second best team in the NFC right now? Second best.
I don't know. That's
exactly. You don't know. Neither do I. Neither do most people, right? Who is the second best in the team and quarterback in the AFC? Oh my God. Josh Allen and the Bills, Joe Burrow and the Bengals, Lamar Jackson potentially and the Baltimore Ravens, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. There is a litany of great. Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars made it to the divisional round playoff. Like it is very, very tough to get to the Super Bowl in the AFC. And yet Aaron Rodgers revealed on the Pat McAfee show that his intention was to play with the New York Jets this year. What does that tell us? It tells us that he believes in the Jets' talent more so than he believes in the Green Bay Packers' talent. To me, on the surface, it is much easier to get to the Super Bowl in the NFC than it is to get to the Super Bowl in the AFC. And yet Rodgers, a guy who is probably better educated than me with his Cal Berkeley tag, he believes that he can get there in the AFC in a better manner than the NFC. And I'm not going to fight with him on that. That makes sense, all right? Again, we're falling down the Rodgers rabbit hole, and I apologize for rambling on this. But I think there's something to be said for that Rodgers wants to play in the AFC with the Jets' talent. We compare Christian Watson to Garrett Wilson. I think Christian Watson is awesome. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be a arguable top 5 wide receiver talent year in and year out for the next 10 years. Agree or disagree on that?
Oh my God, absolutely. Dude, he is absolutely tremendous. And, we were kind of talking a little bit, about some of the Ohio State guys earlier. I mean, like, they know how to produce wide receivers, folks. That's just what they do. He's definitely, maybe not the best of them, because we said something about Marvin Harrison Jr. earlier, but definitely toward the top of that list.
All right. So our producer, number one, our producer, Bennett Carroll, posted that he's only 2 years older than you. So I apologize for lobbing the Ken O'Brien stuff. I shouldn't have done that. That was bad. But he also said, maybe tongue in cheek, maybe not, because I've heard crazier things here in Northeast Wisconsin. Did the Jets trade Elijah Moore to clear cap space to get Jordy Nelson off the farm and back in a New York Jets uniform this year? Again, non-zero chance of anything. Nothing would surprise me at this point. If Aaron Rodgers is throwing to Garrett Wilson, Odell Beckham, and Jordy Nelson this coming year, I'd be one of the least surprised people out there. He also pointed out, if Rodgers plays in 2024, is there any doubt that the NFC North team he'll happen to play at is the Bears for one more crusher? And that's something to be spoken for as well when we talk about Aaron Rodgers going forward. The last thing I want to bring up, I think we'll sneak this in here because I don't think there's a lot to talk about it. Isaiah McKenzie is shifting from the Bills to the Colts. He's going to be playing football in Indianapolis as the Paris Campbell replacement for the Colts. I can't imagine he's going to be great there this year. You can get him super cheap in drafts right now. So, Herms, as we look at Isaiah McKenzie, I don't put the league winner moniker on him, especially when we consider we don't know who the quarterback is going to be in Indianapolis. In fact, there's a non-zero chance that the Colts trade, maybe they find a way to get Aaron Rodgers in Indianapolis and they trade that number 4 pick to the Jets. Jets get Anthony Richardson. I mean, it's crazy town, banana pants all over the place. Anything's possible at this point. We don't know who the Colts quarterback is there. You can get him for free. I'm staying away from Isaiah McKenzie.
I'd care a lot more about the McKenzie news if the offense was going to be something resembling more of what Frank Reich had going on, but with Shane Steichen coming over. I mean, if we're just going to copy and paste the Eagles playbook over and just guess what the role of Isaiah McKenzie is going to be, we're looking at Quez Watkins? What do you really, what are you getting out of that? Perfectly fine NFL player, but, for fantasy, you have to be in the deepest of deep leagues to even contemplate it whatsoever.
It's not worth it at that point, and I think I'm with you on that. That will do it for the wide receiver portion of the second wave of free agency. But here's the thing. You don't want to go anywhere, people, because Herms is waxing poetic, not only in receivers. We're going to get into running backs and tight ends. There's a situation going on in Buffalo with Damian Harris. There's a situation going on in Houston with the formerly of Buffalo Bills, now Houston Texans, Devin Singletary. The Raiders signed a pair of tight ends this past week. We're going to get into that. Dalton Schultz is staying in the state, but he's switching teams. What does that mean for fantasy? It's all coming up. It's Herms at Herms NFL on Twitter. CH Herms from Draft Sharks joining us here on the Bettor Sports Network High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We're going to be back in a couple minutes. Don't go anywhere. We're going to help you win leagues coming up right after this.
Moose and Keith, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bettor Sports Network.
Calvin Ridley yesterday, he applied for reinstatement from the National Football League.
Ridley, Kirk, Zay Jones, Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence. That is crazy potent on offense.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I mean, Ridley's great.
I think Trevor Lawrence is a guy I want in fantasy this year.
I think you're probably right. I think they're just going to get better and better. First off, Peterson's a wonderful offensive mind, a great head coach, and we've seen that and saw that this year as Jacksonville made it to the postseason. And Trevor Lawrence, anybody that questioned whether or not he could play in the National Football League or just how good he was going to be in the NFL, those questions were answered this past season as in the second half of the year. Statistically speaking, he was a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. That's how good Trevor Lawrence is. You throw Calvin Ridley into the mix, it's going to be great. Yeah, I think Lawrence is a guy you want. I think Ridley's a guy you want. Clearly, Travis Etienne is going to be one of those early, first-round selections as well, being the dual-threat running back that he is, not only running, but also catching the ball out of the backfield, Keith, and the ability to take something small and take it to the house. Take a 5-yard dump pass, make a guy miss in the open field, and he's gone. I mean, you saw that with Travis Etienne this past season for Jacksonville. Yeah, sky's the limit. I mean, I think you're going to go from a team in the year span where you wanted no part of the Jacksonville Jaguars when you're looking at fantasy football to where you want as many Jaguars as you possibly can because they're going to be really, really productive. And let's see if they get their tight end back as well, who had
Evan Ingram was great.
And Evan Ingram, who was great this past season.
Yeah. I mean, if they keep that whole core together, their offense is going to be one of the best in football. I legitimately think that they could be one of the best offenses in football.
Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, then
and Ridley,
Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence, a good offensive line, and you've got Doug Peterson being creative calling.
Right?
And you look at that division. The Colts are a mess.
Yep.
Titans
look like they're on the downslide.
Titans are on the downslide, right? That window is clearly closed. And then you got the Houston Texans.
Years away from relevancy.
Yeah.
I mean, Jacksonville could win 11 games next year.
Moose and Keith. Weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bettor Sports Network. Football show on Bettor Sports Network.
We are getting you ready for the upcoming baseball season with the Bettor Baseball preview from fantasy baseball to Major League Baseball betting and the newest baseball cards for 2023. You can access our exclusive content for free right now at bettorsports.com, featuring some of the best baseball minds in the industry. Adam Ronis, Ray Flowers, Kyle Elfrink, Cody Decker, and much more. Get player profiles, prop bets, and futures, sleepers, busts, fantasy rankings, fantasy draft strategy, collectibles. It's all there at no cost. Please register with just your name and email. That's it, at bettorsports.com, bettorsports.com. Right now, get instant access plus the notifications when new features are released. Go to bettorsports.com and sign up for the Bettor Baseball preview. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here on the Bettor Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, joined by special guest co-host tonight, CH Herms from Draft Sharks at Herms NFL on Twitter. I feel like so we got the Bettor boss, Matt, hanging out in the chat room tonight. And I don't want to say he's our resident DeAndre Swift fan, but sometimes I think it feels that way. We've talked a lot about running backs here tonight. Herms, I want to get your opinion on this. So DeAndre Swift looked like he was going to be the next big back in Detroit. The Lions end up signing Jamal Williams from the Packers. He has a couple of good seasons there. In fact, he leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns in 2022. He moves on to New Orleans. What does Detroit do? Give the keys to Swift? No. They're going to sign David Montgomery in the same division from the Chicago Bears. 3 years, $18 million, $11 million guaranteed, which is a lot for a running back. In fact, it's pretty rare that any running back sees $11 million guaranteed on the open market. What does the David Montgomery signing do for you for DeAndre Swift in dynasty leagues? The Bettor boss is saying you should be buying low on DeAndre Swift right now, and you can. After this Montgomery signing, you definitely can buy low on DeAndre Swift. Is that something you would be endorsing, or do you have a different take on DeAndre Swift after the Montgomery signing?
Well, at the risk of being permanently banned from this platform forever, I am not on the DeAndre Swift train.
All right.
I mean, so go back to Hard Knocks on HBO. So, I mean, I'd never actually watched a season of Hard Knocks before this past summer, but like I saw Detroit, like, oh, it seems like fun, Dan Campbell, whatever. And there was a certain episode where they were really talking about, really wanting DeAndre Swift to, find better angles, to, pick his path, be more aggressive, do that whole thing. And he never really showed that much this past year, even when he was healthy, which leads me perfectly into my next point about when is DeAndre Swift ever healthy? Constantly dealing with nagging injuries, and even he'll play through injuries sometimes, get those little handfuls of touches or whatever, but by the end of the year he was just a flex option that you hoped sauntered into the end zone to get you that 6 points, and otherwise it was pretty
well. And Herms, I'll go a step further on that. I don't even think like Jamal Williams was the saunterer in Detroit.
Yeah,
if you started Swift, you were hoping he busted a big one, and if he didn't do that, man, it was a wasted start for him.
Pretty much, and I think at this point, not only was the Jamal Williams thing damning enough, but then they go out and get another guy that has a history of taking on a large workload of carries that can work in between the tackles and do all of that stuff. Like, that should tell you something. It should really tell you what Ben Johnson wants to do with that offense. The fact that they are married to having that sort of irritating headache of a committee with the guy at the head of it not being DeAndre Swift, likeliest to be in line for these high-value red zone and goal line touches. I'm here for it. I love DeAndre Swift as a prospect, but at a certain point, we kind of just have to look at it and, if it sounds like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's a duck.
So Jamal Williams gets a 3-year, $12 million deal from New Orleans, $8 million in guaranteed money, $11 million guaranteed on a 3-year contract for David Montgomery. To me, this suggests that the Lions view Montgomery as an upgrade on Jamal Williams, right? And it's not like they have a new coach. It's the same coach in Dan Campbell. It's not like they have a new OC, the same OC in Ben Johnson. For anybody, and better boss Matt, I love you, but for anybody believing that DeAndre Swift, like this is his ticket and he's going to ascend to new levels in 2023, I always say non-zero chance of anything, but I don't see it happening for DeAndre Swift in 2023. I own him on several dynasty leagues. I'm certainly not selling on him right now. I'm going to see what I have in him, but I'm not buying him at this point. You know, I think he is what he is. I don't think he's a top 12 running back. I think he's a locked in top 25 running back. But what is that really in the grand scheme of things? Because you can, if you're utilizing opportunities and picking off guys off the waiver wire, you can get top 25 running backs off the waiver wire every single week in fantasy football. If you hunt it well enough, you can do it. So for me, Swift is a hold. He's not a sell, and he's definitely not a buy right now. That's my opinion on it. All right, continuing with the running back conversation, Herms. Damian Harris leaves the New England Patriots, but stays in the same division. Adam Schefter reported earlier this week that he has signed a 1-year, $1.77 million contract with the Buffalo Bills. Now, the Bills reportedly were looking for a bigger back to complement James Cook, right, in that backfield. And now it seems like they're getting him in Damian Harris, 5'11", 213, the more burly of the backs between Naheem Hines and James Cook there. He's probably going to be a starter in New England, or I beg your pardon, in Buffalo at that point. And he should get goal line there. But at the same time, while I think this is an improvement for Damian Harris, I don't think this necessarily makes him a guy you want to grab in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, because I don't think he represents that spike week upside, right? Damian Harris is going super cheap right now, running back 47 at the 1108. And this was the majority of those leagues going on after the signing from him going from New England to Buffalo. So I think it makes sense there. But Herms, I'm not really paying much more than that for him, because I think his upside is very, very limited.
Yeah, and like you said, he stands first in line for the goal line carries among the running backs. But
Josh Allen's in it, too.
So until that changes, the value of a Buffalo Bills running back comes in the green zone. Like, those are the touches that you're getting, in between either 20. Like, that's the type of work that they're getting, which at times can pay off when the offense is really clicking and they're just absolutely blowing people out of the water in the first half, kind of run out the clock toward the end there, compile some stats that way. We've seen Devin Singletary do that at times in his career that he spent with Buffalo. But you can't really rely on that because, like we were saying, like, Josh Allen is either going to run it in himself or the connection that he has with somebody like a Dawson Knox. Anytime they get super close, they scheme up plays for him fairly often, do different things like that. There would have to be a fundamental shift in the offense for the running back to possess much greater fantasy value than they actually do, which is one of the reasons for years we've talked about, like, oh man, it'd be a great landing spot for once upon a time Najee Harris. Wouldn't it be cool if they drafted him? Or, even now people are kind of looking at it being like, oh, well, Bijan Robinson would be fantastic if he fell all the way to Buffalo. But you think about it for fantasy purposes, would it really be that fantastic? I don't think so. Great for the NFL team, for sure. But until Josh Allen stops punching it in himself, I'm not really that interested.
Devin Singletary has left Buffalo. He's going to be in Houston this year. I think you have some strong feelings about this, not necessarily on Devin Singletary as a Texan, but what this does to Dameon Pierce, a guy that everybody loved in 2022. Now he's going to have Devin Singletary there. Your thoughts on Dameon Pierce in this Houston Texans backfield with Devin Singletary joining him?
Yeah, I mean, so I like Dameon Pierce. He was an interesting prospect coming out of Florida. That offense that they ran down there made it so that he was never going to have the prospect profile of somebody that dominated a backfield or whatever. They had like a 3 or 4-headed monster. But you watched him on film, you saw like the aggressiveness, his ability to just, his center of gravity, keep himself compact, get through contact. Like, it was really cool. And he was great last year, but like, bro, they were going to bring in somebody else. Like, first and foremost, like that was just going to happen. And then we also saw toward the end of last year. Now, I know that he had, the ankle injury that shut him down for the end of the year, but people forget, I think it was the week against Washington and then the week against Miami. I might have had those flip-flop, but those were 2 weeks where it was like 18 carries for 15 yards or something. Like he hit that wall because he had never exceeded over 180 something touches in college before. And they really worked up his load to the point where you have to possibly ponder the fact. Now, I'm no doctor, but maybe it's just like, maybe that's what kind of, maybe it just broke down a little bit, which is fine. Happens to rookie running backs all the time. I know I'm a Steelers fan. Like Najee Harris in training camp after his rookie year, he talked about, I wasn't really prepared for that. Like I had to rework, the structure of, my muscles and my body to prepare for that physically, but even then, so all of that taken out of it. The reaction that I've seen from people being like, oh, this is good for Dameon Pierce, because it's like, well, we knew they were going to bring in somebody, but we just don't like Devin Singletary, so that means it's fine. And it means they're not going to draft one of the top guys. I'm like, well, when were they going to do that anyway? I don't think it was a feasible landing spot for somebody like a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Bijan Robinson anyway. So, like, taking that imaginary hypothetical out of it, like, cool, A+, I guess. But, like, I don't know. And plus, regardless of what we think of Devin Singletary, we've seen his ability to handle close to 200 total touches in his career in Buffalo. Like, whether he's actually quote unquote good or not is immaterial to the point of this. It's that it's somebody who can carry a lot that is now there that was not there otherwise. So how can this possibly be characterized as good? I don't know. Like, if you paid big for Dameon Pierce in your rookie drafts or something like that, or, like toward the deadline or something, you bought high because you were like, let's go, baby, let's make this title run. Like, don't talk yourself into this being, some magical fairy tale, because it's not what it is. Dameon Pierce hopefully will still be able to have some goal line opportunities, assuming the offense is good enough to get to the goal line. And we'll see. RB2, low end, flex guy. I'm here for it, but it's not going to be anywhere close to what it was last year.
And this is the danger we run into in Dynasty, right? Because Dameon Pierce was a 4th round pick, and Herms, you remember this last year, he was getting a lot of love prior to rookie drafts. Like, this is a guy that, hey, look out for Dameon Pierce. This is a guy that can make a difference. And I think sometimes as Dynasty owners, and I'll lump myself into this because I'm privy to it too. We look at that and we're like, oh my God, I'm going to draft Dameon Pierce at the end of my at the end of the 2nd round of my rookie draft, and I'm going to hit the lottery. And yeah, maybe you do, but it's only for 1 year, right? Like, you can't, like, it's to count on Dameon Pierce, a day 3 pick, for anything more than a year, I think is a fool's errand. It's what makes you bad at Dynasty. And the key is to understand this. Dameon Pierce could be good for 1 year, but you got to flip him at some point that year to get maximum Dynasty return, right? Because now we have a situation where Singletary's there. You bring up the fact that the Houston Texans, who have a lot of draft picks, could draft another running back in a pretty good running back class this year as well, and muddle things even further. And now all of a sudden you've missed the boat on maximizing your value on Dameon Pierce. And this is the kind of things we have to wrap our heads around. Just because a guy is great for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever it is, doesn't necessarily make him a great Dynasty asset. And the people that moved on him early enough are probably the people loving life right now in Dynasty fantasy football. I want to keep this flowing because we're running up against it, and there's a lot of players I want to get to. So we'll kind of go semi-rapid fire on this. Ronald Jones goes to the Cowboys. Ezekiel Elliott has said that he is going to make his decision between, I want to say, like the Jets, the Bengals, were 2 of the teams. Eagles was another one that he was deciding, and he wants to decide by the end of the week. We'll get to Ezekiel Elliott when we get to him. But as far as Ronald Jones and the Cowboys, I know you love Ronald Jones. So speaking from a Ronald Jones fanboy perspective, what does this do for Tony Pollard?
Probably nothing. They're probably going to draft somebody to take some of those touches. I mean, at this point, Ronald Jones kind of just is what he is. I'm just really dedicated to the bit I definitely made my brand in some part due to my love of Ronald Jones. I would like to think anyway, but definitely no illusions of grandeur coming from coming from me on this one, especially when it comes to Ronald Jones. But good for him. Maybe he'll get his 3rd Super Bowl ring. We'll see. I don't know.
So I want to bring this up too because the Better Boss is chiming in on this, and he said, "Aren't there other day 3 running backs who have been long lasting in Dynasty?" And long lasting in Dynasty to me is a bit of an oxymoron because unless you're talking about like a Patrick Mahomes or a Justin Jefferson, everybody's not for long in Dynasty, right? But yes, he's right that there have been day 3 Dynasty picks that have had a good number of years where they have been effective for fantasy football teams. He brings up Aaron Jones. Yeah, I'm in the throes of Lambeau Field here. Aaron Jones was picked a full round after Jamal Williams, who was also a day 3 pick. If people don't remember, this is probably like 7 years ago now. In the 4th round, day 3, the Packers took Jamal Williams out of BYU, and then the following round, in the 5th round, they took Aaron Jones out of UTEP. So it can happen. I don't want to make it seem like if you pick a running back on day 3, if you're an NFL team, you have no hope for longevity there. Longevity can happen. My point, and Herms, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's rare that it happens. And to me, as a dynasty player, I am much more likely to cash in on the lightning rather than ride the lightning out. Riding the lightning out can work like it has with Aaron Jones, right? Or even Jamal Williams to a certain respect, right? But for me, by and large, I'm going with the numbers on that. And if I hit on a day 3 pick at running back, I want to sell him and get something before I got nothing left.
Unless you are just super personally invested in that player for some reason. Like I know for me personally, we were talking about David Montgomery earlier, leaving, going to Detroit. Hey, look at who's there left behind. 6th round pick Khalil Herbert. That's a guy that, I just happened.
Yeah, they were jacked up about Khalil Herbert. And then all of a sudden Deontay Foreman happened, which we reported on this show last Thursday night. Yeah.
Yeah. So unless you just feel that emotional attachment to the player, it's probably the best practice to move on because, and the way that I evaluate running backs and stuff personally is just, once you get past day 2 or whatever, all of the day 3 guys are basically the same, whether you're just picked in the 4th round, 6th round, all that's, it's pretty, to me, it's immaterial. You kind of just have to look at it as, okay, their path to relevance is about the hardest it can possibly be without being undrafted, or I guess just the hypothetical scenario of somebody literally walking off the street having never played football before. That would be the hardest. But you know what I mean? Just pick the talent, pick and choose, pick who you believe in, whatever. And if it hits, just all right, cool, celebration, and then move
on. We talk about, I know we're in the throes of fantasy baseball season right now here on the Bettor Sports Network. And I know a lot of people will talk about the closers that never were, right? A lot of teams will talk about, oh, this guy's the closer in waiting. I just got to get this setup man on my team. He's going to be a closer soon. I feel like to that end, we also have the running backs in waiting that never was, right? And I think one of those is Dearness Johnson in Cleveland, a guy that flashed big time when Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were both hurt. He crushed it, right? He is no longer in Cleveland. He moves on to Jacksonville. Herms, I think the reason I bring this up for dynasty purposes, Travis Etienne, no stranger to the training room, right? Over the course of his career. And now it looks like he's the de facto backup in Jacksonville. What would you give up in a dynasty league for Dearness Johnson, knowing he's probably one injury away from being the starting running back on a team that made it to the final 8 last year in the NFL?
I'm hesitant to give up anything too much, especially because, so full disclosure, I am also a huge Jermichael Hasty fanboy.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Big fan of that guy. He looked very, very good in the time that he spent on the field last year. Now, Dearness Johnson would probably figure to, in a hypothetical world where Etienne gets hurt, Dearness Johnson's probably going to take most of the between the tackles work. Hasty works a lot better on the 2-minute drills, doing pass pro, also just doing, some receiving stuff here and there. So it's different roles functionally, but it's still just somebody that would be on the field while the other guy isn't. So I don't know, but throw a third or a fourth round pick at it. A bit like you're getting the same type of gamble, who knows, return out of that pick anyway. So just turn that into a guy who's already in the NFL, and then woohoo.
That's the great thing about FFPC dynasty leagues is it's short rosters, right? And because you have short rosters, a second round pick, sometimes people can overvalue, right? And if you flip that for a guy like Dearness Johnson, you flip a third round pick for a guy like Dearness Johnson. If you have the room, I always bring up the line from Ferris Bueller. If you have the means, I highly recommend it. He is so choice, and you can get Dearness Johnson on your roster, give up a pick that you probably weren't going to. If you were going to use it, the guy probably wasn't making your team anyway. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Okay, listen, I have been rambling. I have not gotten enough from Herms from you tonight. I want to flip that here in the next segment. So not only are we going to talk about the tight ends, the Raiders have added a couple of tight ends. Dalton Schultz, we talked about him. Mike Gesicki, is he the new coming of Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez in New England? I don't know. We'll get Herm's thoughts on that. Plus, we're getting into some dynasty buys, sells, and holds. Dalvin Cook, Jerry Jeudy, Evan Engram, Chig Okonkwo. There's a ton of guys that Herms is going to weigh in on coming up in the next segment. Be sure to update to the new improved Bettor Sports Network app so you have all the latest developments we've made to give you a first-class experience. It's free in the App Store and Google Play. He's C.H. Herms, at Herms NFL on Twitter, from DraftSharks.com. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the road of his High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the Bettor Sports Network High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, which you're watching right now. It's been an awesome hour number one. It's going to be an even a more fantastic hour number two here on BSN. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Lunch Money with Kyle and Ray. Weekdays at noon Eastern, presented by FantasyGuru.com.
We're talking catchers. And Ray, as we jump into this position, traditionally, this has been a position that you kind of say, well, there's like 2-3 guys and the rest is just junk. And gosh, I'm in a 2-catcher league. How in the hell am I going to fill 2 spots, in this 12-man league? And oh, it's such a struggle after the 8th catcher. Like, fair to say it's different now? I mean, I know it's not great, but it feels like the best catcher pool I've seen in a while, like at least a half decade, in terms of, wow, we've got some hitters, we've got guys, and I know they're not exclusively catchers, and the DH is helping, certainly, but it looks like we're going, 10, 12 deep at least of feeling good about catchers, I think.
I tier the players at positions because I think that's a really good way to look at them. And when you tier players, you're basically putting guys that are likely to produce similar levels of production in the same tier. One guy might be batting average, one guy might be home runs, that kind of a thing, but basically the same end result value-wise. I have 2 guys on the elite tier. I then have 9 guys or 8 guys on the next tier. And then I go all the way to 22 on the third tier, which basically almost gets us to that, 2 catchers in the 24, 12-team league kind of thing. So I agree with you. And I think that even if you look beyond that, there's some names that are outside my top 20 that I could easily see being top 15 catchers this year. So yeah, it's not wow, but it's good overall. We got some young guys coming in that are dynamic players to help out some of the older guys that are still hanging on. It's better than it has been. I agree with you.
It's actually very young, Ray. And that, I mean, you look at Varsho, Rauschman, William Contreras, Kirk, Melendez, Cal Riley's semi-young, but Keibert Ruiz. And there's still other guys coming up that are in the minors right now. That's, we used to always say all these young catchers, just catch, don't worry about hitting. These are guys are coming up with some skill sets as well.
Yeah, and the game is different now, right? Back in the day, you were an old dude that had no athleticism. You were good at blocking balls, and we hoped you'd pop 15 home runs, right? That was kind of the MO. Now it's different. Now we get more athletic guys. It's not that, you have to be some dumpy, slow guy catching. You can be an athletic player that can play other positions, as you noted. So I think the youngsters are bringing more athleticism, kind of like the tight end position in football, right? It's like there is more athleticism at the tight end spot than there was 25 years ago. I think it's the same way at the catcher spot.
Make bets and follow your fantasy team while you buy, sell, and trade collectibles in real time. Only on Bettor Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Bettor Sports Network.
4 minutes past the top of the hour here as hour number 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Bettor Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the FFPC, and of course the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. I am joined by tonight's guest co-host, Herms. It is at Herms NFL, CH Herms, joining us from DraftSharks.com, spitting it as he sees it, not only for redraft purposes, but for dynasty purposes as well. Hey, by the way, from March Madness to the World Series, Bettor Sports Network presents the 2023 Sports Futures Draft. It features picks and odds from the most exciting sporting events of the year. Join Corey Parson, join Nando DeFino, and the Bettor team of producers to find out where the best values are in sports futures, plus betting advice and strategy. Don't miss the Sports Futures Draft, which is now playing at bettorsports.com and on demand with the BSN app. Herms, we did not get a chance to get into the tight ends. I want to get into to the tight ends here and some dynasty buys, sells, and holds here. But I want to get back to the chat room, which is blowing up right now. Bennett Carroll, our producer, is working very hard tonight. He says, tired, Dearness Johnson, wired, Jerome Ford in Cleveland. What do you make of Jerome Ford? Because Johnson is no longer there. Kareem Hunt is a free agent. He's no longer a Brown. You got Nick Chubb. It's basically Jerome Ford unless they draft somebody. I drafted Jerome Ford when he was a rookie as like a late round pick. I got him on some taxi squads in my dynasty leagues right now. But your thoughts on Jerome Ford, who I thought was great with the University of Cincinnati, Desmond Ridder, when they went to the college football playoff. I liked him quite a bit. It hasn't changed. I like Jerome Ford.
Yeah, I didn't quite see it the same way that other people did that, were super in on him as a sleeper, but not to say that he doesn't lack ability. I mean, he can certainly catch the ball fairly well. He has a ton of acceleration to him. I mean, he's the type of player that when you watched him on film, it was as if he was just, pulled back in a slingshot and just let loose. I have some questions about the vision, but he's committed enough to just going for it, that if there's nothing in his way, from just being the second guy behind Nick Chubb in an offense that runs as often as it does, it's a decent, scheme for there to be fantasy points there to be had.
All right, so let's get into to the tight ends here before we run out of time. The Raiders have signed a pair of tight ends. One, let's get this out of the way. Not that I want to get it out of the way. But this is a special message to everybody out there. Foster Moreau, who backed up Darren Waller in Las Vegas last couple of years, is a free agent. He got a routine checkup done in New Orleans, found out he has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's cancer. And he's going to fight it. He's hopefully going to be back to the NFL. And I can't stress this enough. Number one, thoughts and prayers go to Foster Moreau. We're rooting for you, buddy. Number two, we always say all these things. Hey, do this, do this, do this, do this. Well, we're going to say it right now. Make sure you're getting your checkups every single year. Catch this stuff early. We don't know. There's no cure for cancer right now. The best thing you can do is to get yourself checked out as early as possible. This goes for athletes, non-athletes, you, me, everybody going on right now. And that's the best thing you can do right now. And we're rooting for Foster Moreau. And we're definitely rooting for you to make sure that if you do have this, catch it early. I had a buddy back, not that I want to go off on this, but I had a buddy back in high school, routine physical, had testicular cancer. And, it was tough for him for a couple of years, but he beat it. He's still alive. Now we're in our mid 40s. He's got a family. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids, and he's crushing it right now. But it's because he detected this early. He was able to live this life of fulfillment, and that's what I root for everybody out there to make sure that you're defending yourself against this. And if you are inflicted with it, get it checked early. So with the medicine we have right now, to make sure that you can beat it, as we hope Foster Moreau does. Getting back to the Raiders, Austin Hooper is now a Raider. O.J. Howard is now a Raider. Herms, as you look at these Raiders, Howard, it seems like he was on his way to becoming something in the NFL, and then he had that nasty injury that really sapped him of a lot of his athleticism. Austin Hooper was a guy that we were very excited about the year he came out into the NFL with Zach Ertz. Never really lived up to it. I know he had a pretty good year with Atlanta the year they went to the Super Bowl. But Hooper, Howard in Las Vegas. We know it's Jimmy Garoppolo. We know there's no Darren Waller. Is there anything to be gained here from a fantasy perspective between these two players? Are you targeting either of them? Are you, not targeting? Are you fading both of them? How do you view Hooper and Howard the new tight ends in Las Vegas.
I mean, unfortunately, like you said, with Howard, I believe it was the Achilles tear that just ever since that happened, it's just it is what it is. I'm happy that he's still making a living doing something that he cares about, but as far as fantasy, not really there for me. But Hooper, now mind you, this is only in your deeper, specifically tight end premium leagues, because outside of tight end premium, I'm not really thinking about it. But in tight end premium, I mean, any tight end that gets enough targets thrown their way, if you don't have one of the elite guys and you're just diving through the dumpster anyway, sure, why not? Once upon a time when he was still in Cleveland, I mean, he was pretty effective in that irritating rotation of tight ends. And, last year didn't quite work out for many reasons, but also there's a young guy playing tight end in Tennessee right now that we'll definitely get to a little bit later that maybe has something to do with that. But Hooper's not so old and washed up to the point where he can't be halfway decent at this point. But in the grand scheme of things, in your more typical scoring format leagues, I'm not doing too much with either of them.
I don't know how I got into this. It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm working late. Like I have a lot of jobs, right? And so I'm very busy. And a lot of times I will unwind with some YouTube stuff. Herms, I don't know how I got on this, but I was delving into like great NFL games over the last 10 years. And I ended up watching a 21-minute highlight video of the Falcons and Patriots in Super Bowl 51 or 52. I can't remember which one it was, whatever it was. And Austin Hooper caught a touchdown in that game. Like, God, I totally forgot he was on it because I think Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, right? I don't think of Austin Hooper, but he caught a touchdown in that game. And I forget how much we valued him, not only that year, but as far as rookie drafts went that year in the FFPC as well. So I think there's something to be said for that. But you're right. I mean, both of these guys are off the radar in FFPC Never Too Early drafts in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now. You can get those guys for free. Now, whether either of those guys turn into a league winner in Las Vegas, I think that's debatable. I don't think either one of them will, but 1.5 per catch tight end premium, like the FFPC has, there is a non-zero chance of anything. Let's get into Dalton Schultz because he stays in the state of Texas, but he goes to Houston. He had the opportunity. Devondre Campbell, I think it was Devondre Campbell, the Packers inside linebacker, was chiming in on Twitter saying that this dude had the opportunity to sign, I believe it was 3 years and $32 million or $36 million. He turned it down because he thought he could get something better. Well, he didn't get it. He gets a 1 year, $9 million contract to play in Houston. We think probably for Bryce Young, although, we don't know who the quarterback is going to be in Houston this coming year. So we look at Dalton Schultz in Houston. And I'll tell you this right now, in the Fantasy Pros Championship, which is going to award a $1 million grand prize at the end of the season, Dalton Schultz is tight end 11 at the 906. Now, 906, I think it makes sense. Tight end 11, man, he's going in front of Cole Kmet. He's going in front of Greg Dulcich, Dawson Knox, Chigo Kwanko, who you just alluded to. Mike Gesicki, who's now in New England. Tyler Higbee, who I think is unrated in Los Angeles. I'd be fading Dalton Schultz at this point. And I think about all those people that drafted him thinking he was going to be on the Cowboys. That was a mistake. He is a fade for me. I am not on the Dalton Schultz train for 2023, Herms.
The best thing that could have happened to him would have been, I suppose, reuniting with Kellen Moore in Los Angeles.
Yes, absolutely.
That was the thing. It was either going there or going back to Dallas somehow, and that was about it. Because otherwise, when you're a tight end changing teams, I mean, it's always it's difficult to predict the tight end position in general, enough as it is, even if you're still on the same team that you were on. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. The thing he has going for him, I guess tying a neat little bow on, a couple separate pieces of Texans things we've talked about so far, he might actually be the best pass catcher, but what does that mean on a Texans offense that ranked super low in pretty much every category across the board? I mean, and there is that correlation between, the rookie quarterback leaning on the tight end, there's certain studies of, the statistics into that. There's some credence to it, but not enough for me to take him as the tight end 11. No, and also just potentially more from a real life standpoint, but I think there's a fantasy morsel in here too. think about the fact that he was only able to secure that 1 year, $9 million deal betting on himself like that.
Yeah.
Think about the fact that a team wasn't willing to go super aggressive with a super high offer. Similar thing we kind of saw with Evan Ingram receiving the franchise tag from Jacksonville. You look at this incoming tight end class of rookies. There are a lot of really talented tight ends coming into the league very, very soon that, I think the league's kind of just telling us, it's like, we'll throw you a little chunk of change, but we'd much rather invest in some of these younger players that are still fresh. So just keep an eye on these rookie tight ends coming in, folks.
I look at it from a redraft perspective, right? Dalton Schultz, 802 is the highest he's gone in the last couple of weeks. He has an ADP at 903, but the latest he's gone is the 1102. And I think the best piece of advice we can give people right now, if you're drafting now, wait on Dalton Schultz to fall where that 1102 is not the latest he's going, but it's his new ADP. If you can get 2 more rounds of ADP on a guy like Dalton Schultz, where he's not your second tight, or where he's not your first tight end, he's your second tight end, and maybe if you go really crazy, he could be your third tight end. Now I think you're talking with Dalton Schultz. But right now, to draft him as your number 1 tight end, I think you're doing it wrong in the 9th round. The last thing I want to bring up with tight ends is Mike Gesicki. This is a guy that, I'll be the first to admit, I thought when Mike McDaniel took over in Miami, this is a guy that was never going to flourish there. Mike McDaniel wants his tight ends able to block. Mike Gesicki was never a blocker going back to his days at Penn State. Now he is going to be in New England, 1 year, $9 million. And his offensive coordinator is the dude who was coaching him at Penn State, Bill O'Brien, a guy who recruited him to Penn State back when he was in high school. So he obviously likes him. Now, Jonnu Smith is no longer in New England. He's in Atlanta. Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry are the new tight end tandem in New England. Gesicki had career lows in numbers last year, but we knew that was coming. Like, at least I think most people knew career lows were coming for Mike Gesicki. But if you look back to 2021, dude had 70-plus catches that year. And I think there's something to be said about Mike Gesicki in New England this year. And if you look at, we talked about how we don't like the ADP right now of Dalton Schultz. You look at the ADP of Mike Gesicki, which I just had it up right now. See if I can bring it up again. Yeah, tight end 16, Herms. He is going in the 12th round. Now, while Dalton Schultz is a sell, I'm all in on Mike Gesicki in the 12th round as tight end 16, because I think this is the type of guy that can get you through a lot of weeks in a best ball tournament.
I completely agree, especially when we look at just what the Patriots have historically done anyway. Whoever holds the title of offensive coordinator in New England is, kind of is what it is. But generally, the offense has been basically the same forever. And the big thing that we always point at is the fact that, like slot receivers, like we really like that, in New England. And, I get a lot out of my PFF subscription. It's really bang for my buck for how often I use this. If you go through and look at Mike Gesicki relative to other tight ends over those peak years in which he was doing super well, it was basically him and Mark Andrews that sat atop the list of the percentage of routes run through the slot. Mike Gesicki is essentially just a glorified slot receiver classified as a tight end,
which we love. In the
Yes.
FFPC tight end premium, we love that. Absolutely. Keep going.
Yeah, so like just looking at it from just hacking it from that standpoint, people think about it and just worry. It's like, oh, well, Hunter Henry is still there. Like, that's going to block him from being a tight end. I'm like, well, he's not a tight end. So what are we worrying about? Assuming that there is that intended goal of having, the coaching staff play to Gesicki's strengths, especially a guy who we know brought him into college in the first place and worked with the guy that made him the NFL draft prospect that he was. There has to be some sort of plan in place. I mean, the little kind of, wrench in the whole thing is Juju Smith-Schuster signing. He has operated primarily out of the slot over the last several years of his career. That could possibly make things a little bit more difficult. We'll have to see what they do a little bit creatively from that standpoint. But Mike Gesicki, why not? Why not?
All right. Why not, indeed? And I want to, because I don't have Juju Smith-Schuster on the run now, but I want to bring this up because Jacoby Myers is gone, right? Mm-hmm. So don't you think that a large plurality of those targets that Jacoby Myers is getting, Smith-Schuster is going to get this year? And then I think about how underwhelming Smith-Schuster was in Kansas City, or at least I thought he was underwhelming in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes last year. I think that with Myers moving on, I think there's a lot to like about Gesicki this year, even with the addition of Smith-Schuster, which I think is being overrated in high-stakes fantasy circles right now, Herms.
I mean, yeah, dude. Especially if we're just going to look at it from the perspective of, like, even if we were worried about Juju Smith-Schuster, if we're just looking at, like, who are the pass catchers that are possibly going to have some spot in, the 1, 2, 3, 4 pecking order for, receiving opportunities. Are we currently that worried about speed demon Tyquan Thornton taking a large percentage of targets? No. Probably fun for the real life team, probably not so much for the fantasy team. You're going to look at somebody like a Devontae Parker. Once upon a time, we liked him, finally had that one healthy year, rejoice, and then it's back to the same issues. I'm not really that concerned about him either. So if we're just looking at, like, who's even reasonably healthy enough or talented enough to secure the targets, like you said, even if Juju just takes a plurality of that, like, there's still that leftover number that has to go somewhere, probably Gesicki. And unless, like, I don't know, maybe they'll throw more to the backfield perhaps, but as the backfield is presently constructed, I don't really see how that's going to happen unless Pierre Strong elevates his role. I know that Belichick likes to take his time with rookie running backs. Year 2, something could possibly happen there. But, like, yeah, it's largely going to be funneled through probably Juju, Hunter Henry to some degree, Ramondre Stevenson, and that still leaves room for Mike Gesicki.
Yes, it does. That's the great thing about this. That's totally underrated. Speaking of totally underrated, all the content you've been churning out with DraftSharks.com, I want to touch on it a little bit. I don't want to give away the farm, but I want to talk about a few players tonight. You recently wrote a piece on there for Dynasty owners, and we're at Dynasty season, as the kids say right now. Buys, sells, and holds. Let's concentrate on a few of these right now. If you own these guys, if you're looking to acquire these guys, what should you be doing? I'm going to kick things off with Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. Now, everything I've read, everything I've consumed, everything I've heard, it seems like the Vikings want Alexander Mattison to be their starting running back this coming year. Dalvin Cook yet is still part of the team. So, and I think that surprised a lot of people locally in Minnesota, that where they thought Cook would be gone at this point, he's still a member of the Vikings. What are you doing what are you doing with him in dynasty leagues right now, Herms? Are you buying him? Are you selling him? Are you holding Dalvin Cook right now?
I mean, I'm definitely not buying. I would be looking to sell if I can get something decent for him. But I mean, if you can't, then you're probably going to have to be forced to hold. But regardless, like, the issue with him in general is that once TJ Hawkinson arrived via trade at the trade deadline, the Vikings transformed their offense into something different than it had been, for, a couple of years there, to the point where from week 10 on, Dalvin Cook was barely over double-digit fantasy points per game, and his target share shrunk to 7.5%. So that's taking away the PPR value that he adds to his floor. And he had his lowest rushing yards per game that he'd had at any point in his career, other than one of the first couple of years where he was dealing with injuries. But you know what I mean? Like, since he broke out, this is the worst that we've seen him be. Like, and we're probably going to look at Minnesota potentially looking at another wide receiver in the first round of the NFL draft. It's very concentrated on, okay, look, guys, this stuff wasn't working. We have an opportunity to bring in an impact tight end, do whatever. We're still paying Kirk Cousins, the rest of this year, and I believe only next year after that. Let's just milk our money's worth out of it and throw. That's its own issue. And then Dalvin Cook, we always talk about, like the age cliff for running backs. He's getting pretty close to it. He already has that injury history that, probably doesn't matter too much now, but as you continue to get older, those knocks against you from your earlier years, that'll, start to pile up a little bit in terms of feeling sore and whatnot. And then as the contract with him wears on, like, the dead money gets less and less that they'd have to incur on themselves. So he might not even be on the team after this next year. And then what are you going to do? Right. Hope that we could just be talking about him like we're talking about Ezekiel Elliott right now. a year from now. So,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
you know.
So let me ask you this on Dalvin Cook, who will turn 28 years old before the season starts. Would you give, we always play this show on one of my other shows, would you rather have Dalvin Cook or the 112 in a rookie draft right now?
I think I'd rather have the 112.
Okay, you'd rather have the 112. Would you rather have Dalvin Cook or the 203 in a rookie draft right now?
That's a bit of a toss-up for me.
Okay,
I
so
think
perfect.
that's probably...
So this is great, because if you have the opportunity to sell Dalvin Cook for either the 112 or the 203 right now, you could probably go with selling Cook, getting that pick back, and feeling pretty good about yourself from a dynasty perspective, right?
Probably, yeah.
All right,
I mean,
okay.
look, yeah.
2 years, $7 million. As of about a week and a half ago is what the Vikings re-signed Alexander Mattison to. The Vikings have been looking for a way out on this contract. Will they find one out? I don't know. But certainly Dalvin Cook, there's a non-zero chance he's on somebody else's roster at the start of 2023. Dalvin Cook is a sell for the right price. What about J.K. Dobbins, Herms? What are you doing with J.K. Dobbins right now in Dynasty?
Oh, dude, I love myself some J.K. Dobbins. Man, it's unfortunate that he's had to deal with the knee injury.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for, 2 years ago now, but even into this past season. It kind of hampered him a little bit early on, off to a little bit of a slow start. Came back, kind of had to deal with it, get the little cleanup, arthroscopic, whatever. But by the time he came back, man, I will tell you what, like that last stretch of games, he was super good. He was torching, unfortunately, I can remember the game against the Steelers late in the year. He was super good, and that really annoyed me. But, he's starting to look more like the guy that we saw in his rookie season. Now, mind you, when we saw J.K. Dobbins as a rookie, I believe he finished within the PFF top 12 or at least 15 within rushing grade as a rookie. In the entire NFL, like that's the type of dude that we're talking about. And if you're a little bit concerned about like, well, Greg Roman's out of town, what's it going to be like in the Todd Monken offense? Like, I don't know. Maybe the volume goes down a little bit from the rushing department, but at least we know just from watching games at University of Georgia, they're willing to throw to the running backs, which is a really underrated aspect of J.K. Dobbins' prospect profile when he was coming out of college. When he was playing at Ohio State, he was a pretty decent receiver, doing some stuff, in the dump off and the flat, the screens and the whatnot. Like, he's not some otherworldly guy that you're going to want to, run Texas angle routes or anything, but he's a good enough receiver that he could definitely add some of that value to your fantasy team and the Ravens real life team now that there's a chance that they'll begin to throw to running backs. So you have to gamble on a guy who's still, mind you, extremely young, has a lot of that injury stuff out of the way. Thankfully took his time for the most part last year, didn't come back so soon and have some sort of, horrible re-aggravation that required a second full surgery or something. Why not? Especially with where his value is right now, like there's still an opportunity to buy low, especially with the questions at quarterback. Will they? Won't they? Lamar Jackson? Who knows? Buy J.K. Dobbins.
And so I want to talk about his real life teammate Rashad Bateman, because this is a player that I think not necessarily in the month of March, but like February after Monken got hired, everybody's like, oh my God, I got to get a bunch of shares of Mark Andrews. Oh my God, I got to get a bunch of shares of Rashad Bateman, a guy who ended last year in IR. So people forget about, his value to Baltimore. And now that they should be throwing a lot more this season with Monken as opposed to Roman, what are your thoughts on Rashad Bateman as dynasty? Is he a slam dunk buy, or is there a little bit of trepidation here on grabbing Rashad Bateman in dynasty?
For this one, I'm going to take off my analyst hat and I'm just going to put on my fan of playing fantasy football hat, because there are a couple leagues where I have Rashad Bateman.
Okay.
And I've received the offers, and they're pretty good offers too. And I'm like, this makes sense. If you plug it in a trade calculator, if you feel like doing that, this makes sense. But there's that part of me that I'm like, but he could still be good. I don't want to be if I trade him now and I look back like a year from now and just, smack myself on the forehead and say, why did I do that? I can't decide. We've only seen short, little spurts and windows of him being super good, because there was that whatever injury it was as a rookie, early on in training camp. Took him until like week 8 to even come back. That was a small sample size. Even this past year, he barely made it halfway through the season, if at all. Another injury kind of shut him down. But he's been pretty good. We've seen the little flashes. I can't do it, man. I can't. He's a hold. He is a hold.
Okay.
Mostly just because I don't want to miss out.
Russell Wilson, we found out, and I should have looked this up before I talked about it. But we have a situation right now with Russell Wilson, who obviously let us all down. Anybody who invested in him in 2022 had off-season surgery. We found out from The Athletic that he wanted Pete Carroll and John Schneider fired if he's going to stay in Seattle. And this is all tantamount to what do we do with Jerry Jeudy in drafts this year? Not only in drafts, but in Dynasty. We've heard reports that other teams have wanted him. We've heard reports that the Broncos don't want to let him go. Jerry Jeudy in Dynasty, the former number one overall, the former number 1 pick for the Denver Broncos. Is he a guy that you'd be willing to sell for 90 cents on the dollar, 95 cents on the dollar? Or is he a guy that you want to acquire at this point in draft terms?
Jerry Jeudy, man, I've had a weird relationship with Jerry Jeudy. It's a whole thing, man. It was clear coming out of college. I mean, he definitely has all of the talent profile that you want to see from a receiver, but it took a while to get going. Whether just through the early emergence of Cortland Sutton putting up the season he did a handful of years ago, kind of making things complicated. Jerry Jeudy dealing with injuries of his own, taking himself off of the field. But he finally managed to set that career high in target share last year, especially toward the end of the year when, his teammate Sutton was, injured there. Like, Jeudy made a huge impact for you on your fantasy teams. All the while, the Broncos had PFF's 24th graded passing offense.
Mm-hmm.
Not great. So, but if you're putting up
not
that
great,
level
Bob, right? You're bringing the bad men. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, if you're putting up that type of, decent wide receiver 2 fantasy production in what is arguably one of the worst passing offenses, like that says something about what you have going for you. And now Sean Payton coming in, turning the offense into whatever that's going to look like. But if it looks anything like we've seen Sean Payton offenses be in the past, there's a role for Jerry Jeudy to do those kinds of things. Because we look at the types of receivers that have been super successful historically in Sean Payton offenses. I mean, we'd have to go back to the days of, I can't even remember the guy's name. Oh, Marcus Colston. Yeah, like it's been a while since we've had like that big body doing the whole thing. That's more of
seventh round pick on a Hofstra. I will never forget it. Like he decided fantasy leagues his rookie year, and he never should have, but he did. God, Marcus Colston, first reference ever on this show for Marcus Colston. Hat tip to @Herms NFL. CH Herms bringing up Marcus Colston. Keep going. That's fantastic.
Well, look, see, that's why they pay me the big bucks over at DraftSharks.com. Check it out. But that's more of the archetype that like a Cortland Sutton's probably going to do. It's been a while. We want those smaller guys that can operate out of the slot, that have that acceleration, yard creating type stuff to them. That's way more of Jerry Jeudy's bag. Of all the receivers that are in that room. And like, no offense to like a Tim Patrick or something, like he could be kind of interesting, I guess, maybe blah, 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 especially if the rumors are true and one of these receivers gets traded out of Denver. But like, even if they don't, like just historically the Sean Payton offense, what type of receivers do really well? Look at the receivers that are there. That's Jerry Jeudy. It fits the hypothetical version of the offense to a T.
Quickly, how many cents on the dollar, Herms, are you willing to sell Cortland Sutton? 65%? Or 65 cents, 70 cents on the dollar in Dynasty.
Yeah, probably 60, 65. At this point, it's sinking further and further every day.
All right, the last thing I want to get into before we get in, we haven't hit the Dynasty portion of the show. We're going to get that next. But Chigakwanko, this is a guy right now that came on at the end of last season. If you look at his numbers from week 12 on, he never caught fewer than 4 passes. He never had fewer than 4 targets, which is a little bit different from week 12 on, which is pretty good. And Chigakwanko right now, if you look at, again, the FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship, this is a tight end premium championship right now. Chigakwanko is going at tight end 15 at the 1101. Your thoughts on Chigakwanko, not only in redraft leagues, but dynasty leagues right now, Herms? What are you doing with him?
Well, anybody that can see the video for this can see the Maryland flag flying behind me. So, shout out Chickaconquo, Maryland Terrapin. Let's go. Already love him from that standpoint. But I remember my coworker Jared Smola. He mined this fun little stat that we ended up throwing into the article about this in terms of just how good Chickaconquo has been. 31 rookie tight ends have registered 40-plus targets over the last 10 seasons. So you put that group together, you look at the different numbers and stuff, and where does Chickaconquo rank on this list in some of these key metrics? We're talking third in PFF receiving grade on that list and first in yards per route run. That is how good Chickaconquo was. And he didn't really get the ball rolling until probably like week 11, 12, 13 or so of last year. Like, it was a late breakout. But by the time that the opportunity presented itself, he really seized it and just ran with it. Part of that was while Treylon Burks was dealing with, certain injuries. I know he had his groin, and then there was that concussion thing because he had that ball against Philly in the end zone come down, hit his head weird. Right. So we'll see how much that had to do with it. But you look at those critical metrics, especially for it takes time for rookie tight ends to break out. But if you have that type of effectiveness super early in your career, sometimes we have to wait till year 2, 3, 4 for these guys. And he was baller as a rookie. You don't question it, man. Look at his relative athletic score. Just look at all that stuff. There's a huge correlation there for the tight end position as well. Just he ticks all the boxes. Chickaconquo is that dude. I love him to death.
I think anybody who's drafting in the FFPC right now, if you wait on tight end, Chickaconquo maybe isn't your number 1 tight end, but he has to be your number 2 tight end. I love him where he's going right now in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament in the Fantasy Pros Championship. You're doing it wrong if you pass on him as your number 2 tight end when you wait on your number 1 tight end. I think he is a slam dunk at that point. Speaking of slam dunks, we have not gotten into any dynasty fantasy football talk. We're going to do that next. Okay. Jackson Smith and Jigba ran the 40 today. What does Herms think about that? Bijan Robinson met with the Eagles, and Herms has done a full study on all the rookie running backs. Where does Bijan Robinson fit in? And he's number 1. But let's get into the other stuff. Tyjae Spears, we're going to talk about him. Israel Bonaconda, we're going to talk about him, as well as why Michael Mayer is not the number 1, not even the number 2 tight end for Herms this year for Dynasty rookie drafts. I'm Eric Balkman, High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, RotoViz High Stakes RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and the FFPC. He is Herms from DraftSharks.com at Herms NFL. We're going to talk about all that Dynasty stuff and more coming up here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bettor Sports Network. Don't go anywhere.
Lunch Money with Kyle and Ray. Weekdays at noon Eastern, presented by FantasyGuru.com.
We're talking catchers. And Ray, as we jump into this position, traditionally, this has been a position that you kind of say, well, there's 2, 3 guys and the rest is just junk. And gosh, I'm in a 2-catcher league. How in the hell am I going to fill 2 spots, in this 12-man league? And it's such a struggle after the 8th catcher. Fair to say it's different now? I mean, I know it's not great, but it feels like the best catcher pool I've seen in a while, at least a half decade, in terms of, wow, we've got some hitters, we've got guys, and I know they're not exclusively catchers, and the DH is helping, certainly, but it looks like we're going, 10, 12 deep at least of feeling good about catchers, I think.
I tier the players at positions because I think that's a really good way to look at them. And when you tier players, you're basically putting guys that are likely to produce similar levels of production in the same tier. One guy might be batting average, one guy might be home runs, that kind of a thing, but basically the same end result value-wise. I have 2 guys on the elite tier. I then have 9 guys or 8 guys on the next tier. And then I go all the way to 22 on the 3rd tier, which basically almost gets us to that, 2 catchers in the 24, 12-team league kind of thing. So I agree with you. And I think that even if you look beyond that, there's some names that are outside my top 20 that I could easily see being top 15 catchers this year. So yeah, it's not wow, but it's good overall. We got some young guys coming in that are dynamic players to help out some of the older guys that are still hanging on. It's better than it has been. I agree with you.
It's actually very young, Ray. And that, I mean, you look at Varsho, Rauschman, William Contreras, Kirk, Melendez, Cal Riley's semi-young, but Keibert Ruiz. And there's still other guys coming up that are in the minors right now. That's, we used to always say all these young catchers, just catch, don't worry about hitting. These are guys are coming up with some skill sets as well.
Yeah, and the game is different now, right? Back in the day, you were an old dude that had no athleticism. You're good at blocking balls, and we hoped you'd pop 15 home runs, right? That was kind of the MO. Now it's different. Now we get more athletic guys. It's not that, you have to be some dumpy, slow guy catching. You can be an athletic player that can play other positions, as you noted. So I think the youngsters are bringing more athleticism, kind of like the tight end position in football, right? It's like there is more athleticism at the tight end spot than there was 25 years ago. I think it's the same way at the catcher spot.
Make bets and follow your fantasy team while you buy, sell, and trade collectibles in real time. Only on Bettor Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Bettor Sports Network.
20 minutes of power is what we're going to give you here on the remainder of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bettor Sports Network, ladies and gentlemen. As a reminder, I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the road of his High Stakes Slowdown. He is CH Herms from DraftSharks.com, at Herms NFL on Twitter. Reminder, adopt the Dynasty Orphan team today with the FFPC. Discounted teams are available, ranging from $77 all the way up to $2,500. Just go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. I always say this, I can't emphasize enough. There's a lot of reasons why people would give up dynasty teams: a new job, a loss of job, a new wife, a loss of life, wife. Oh God, not a loss of life, a loss of wife, a loss of family, a gain of family. A lot of people have stuff going on. You can get dynasty teams, dynasty orphans right now for as low as $1. Take advantage of that. myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Herms, Jackson, Smith, and Jigba ran between a 4.48 and a 4.52 40 today at Ohio State's Pro Day. This cements him to me as the number one receiver in the NFL draft this year. He outperformed Chris Olave. He outperformed Garrett Wilson when they were all teammates at Ohio State in 2021. I love Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think anybody who drafts him in the first round is going to get a deal on him. How do you see him for Dynasty Fantasy Football?
I mean, we all still really like Amon-Ra St. Brown, right?
Yep.
So, look, if you like Amon-Ra St. Brown, you are going to love Jackson Smith and Jigba. So, I mean, honestly, there's really not any need to overthink it, I mean, I can't remember what interview it was. I think it was, as part of like ESPN's College Football Today coverage or whatever, however long ago it was. They had, Olave, Wilson, and all them, sitting down, and I think it was Kirk Herbstreit or somebody asked the question, who's the best among you? And they all said Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Marvin Harrison Jr. He's the best guy among them. No, I'm just kidding. But they all said Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's if they're telling you that, and we're talking about, two rookie wideouts that just finished within the top 25 in PPR scoring as rookies themselves, there it is. I don't care where he gets drafted. It does not matter to me where he gets drafted, because whatever team he goes to, he's going to be super good. And people can look at it and just, if you're somebody who doesn't take a lot of time and look at the rookie stuff, and you see number one receiver in the class and you assume that they're probably a burner, maybe you'll be quote unquote disappointed by, the speed or whatever. But it's that's not the type of dude that he is. He's going to be operating out of the slot. He does enough well to be able to, create separation and yardage in that portion of the field anyway. You don't need to be super fast to do that. Keenan Allen's not super fast, and he's been doing this just fine for a very long time.
Let me ask you this. So Bijan Robinson met with the Philadelphia Eagles. That would be a great get for them if they get him. You and I both love Jackson Smith and Jigba. What about Smith and Jigba or Bijan Robinson at the 101, knowing that receivers have a longer shelf life in Dynasty? Are you strong enough? I'm not. I'll tell you right now, I am not strong enough to take JSN over Bijan Robinson.
I can't do it.
You can't do it either. Okay. So it's still Bijan at the 101, JSN at the 102, right?
Yeah, dude. Bijan Robinson, man. I mean, you can't pass up an opportunity to take a guy like that. Now, I am not the type of person, I don't like throwing around the generational tag because at this point it's been beaten into the ground just so many times. But we haven't seen a guy quite like Bijan, at least for a few years now. And like I've done my full dynasty profile of him over on the website, and I came away just absolutely amazed by everything that I saw, especially because even the negatives in his profile, if there are any, speak more to his play style than anything else. And he really gets away with it anyway, just because like at times he is a little overly aggressive, doesn't always make the smartest decision from a vision perspective. But when you're that big and you're that fast effectively on the field anyway, it's fine. It'll be okay. Like you can get away with certain lapses in judgment when you're just that type of athlete. There's the only world in which I can imagine Bijan Robinson striking out is some sort of like devastating injury, or he just gets locked into this irritating committee that he can never get out of. Barring those situations, I don't really see how it fails.
Okay, so let's talk about, because you obviously not only analyzed Bijan Robinson for DraftSharks.com, we alluded to your buy, sell, hold dynasty article that you produced for DraftSharks, which you can check out at DraftSharks.com. What about the rookie running backs besides Bijan Robinson? In your research, Herms, what did you find out about this class, or specifically anything about the players in this class?
I think that we have been spoiled over relatively recent history. I mean, we look back at like the 2017 class, certain guys like that, like even the year that, gave us Dobbins and Swift and all those guys, we've been spoiled. And then the last few draft cycles, it hasn't been quite that deep, and people get kind of annoyed and they're just like, oh, these running backs suck now, blah, blah. It's just like, okay, well, we're not going to get like just a treasure trove of insanely good guys all the time. But the beauty of this class, and part of this kind of rolls over into next year's rookie class as well, but that different topic for a different day, is that when we just look at it from both a fantasy perspective and a real life perspective, there is a talent cycle at all positions. Obviously, depending on the position, the arc is much longer. Like obviously for quarterbacks, I mean, we're just seeing the window officially close on the generation of quarterbacks that I grew up with watching. That is obviously a much longer arc. We talk about it with wide receivers as well. You can probably do pretty well for about 7 to 10 years. Shorter, but still a very long arc. But at running back, I mean, we're really talking about some of the same names that we've had ranked within the top 5, top 10, or whatever for redraft purposes and somewhat for dynasty over the last 5-6 years, starting to fall off. We already had that conversation earlier about Dalvin Cook. I had mentioned Ezekiel Elliott's name. We're seeing is Alvin Kamara going to get suspended for that situation in Las Vegas for, this season finally? Possibly. All sorts of things happening. Those guys are starting to go away. Now we're seeing this influx of younger talent, and there are a lot of guys in this class that may not end up being true workhorse 3-down running backs. I think there's about maybe 4, potentially 5, maybe 6 of them, I guess, if we're really going to stretch it, but conservatively about 4 that could easily step in and do that. But plenty of guys that serve serviceable roles in committees, because we're seeing the NFL shift to the committee approach wholesale for the most part across the league. A lot of really great guys that can do the early down work as the 1A, a lot of really talented guys that could be some pass catchers, do some sort of scat back assignment stuff. It's relatively deep. And I think if you're somebody that loaded up on 2023 rookie draft picks, not necessarily in the first round, but if you have a lot of second round picks, if you have a lot of third round picks, I'm just emptying that clip on all these running backs and just seeing what sticks, because I love a lot of these guys.
All right. So you and I happen to agree with you for this season and kind of other seasons as well. I want you to talk specifically over the next couple of minutes about a couple of running backs that I think you're higher on than your Draft Sharks peers. And that is Tyjae Spears, who had a great Senior Bowl. And that is Israel Abanikanda, a guy that I think a lot of people, maybe not a ton of people, but definitely a lot of people think that he has a future as a 3-down running back in the NFL. Spears, Abanikanda, Herms, what do you think?
I'll start with Abanikanda because we're not going to have complete information about him until March 29th, which I believe is like what, next Wednesday or whatever. The
Next Wednesday. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So the Pitt Pro Day, that's when we're going to see Abanikanda do some things, because he measured in at the combine, but he didn't participate and do anything there. So we're going to need to see how he tests in terms of his speed specifically, and also, just whatever other sort of drills he wants to run at that pro day. But like, the speed is really big for me, especially because he's a guy that this past season had 38 runs of 10 or more rushing yards. He was able to just break off these home runs. I think it was like 5'11", 212 pounds, something like that. Like, he weighed in as a stout guy, and he showed, at least on tape, that, he's capable of breaking off those big plays, as a runner. But what kind of worries me about him is that despite that, he ranked well outside of the top 100 in PFF's elusive rating this past season, although he finished within the top 20 the year before on fewer carries. I think it was about maybe 75, 85, somewhere in there, fewer carries the year before, where he, registered much higher in that metric. Is he more of that kind of player that is going to be more effective on a smaller workload, or is he maybe the type of guy that could be trusted with a lot? I don't know. We're going to have to find out. And then the other wrinkle is, we didn't see a ton of evidence suggesting that he could be like a super effective pass catcher. He could maybe be more in the way that I break down the running backs is, at least as far as them functioning as pass catchers, I have them put into the archetypal bucket of either being a natural receiver or being a capable receiver. Like, the natural receivers, we look at it, the Saquon Barkleys, the Christian McCaffreys, Jameer Gibbs coming into the league. I would classify him. He's going to have a diverse enough route tree as a running back that, like, yeah, that's a guy you can definitely trust. Abanikanda, probably a bit more in the capable range, where if he is trusted with anything, it's going to be dump off screens and flats. Anything else beyond that, I highly doubt we'll ever see it. But in the right landing spot, and if he does test to be fast enough like we think he is, he's got the build. So I'm definitely here for it.
Herms, you not only have Michael Mayer not as your number one tight end, you don't even have him as your number two tight end. In fact, you have Luke Musgrave ranked ahead of Michael Mayer in your rookie tight end drafts. Can you tell me a little bit of why you like Musgrave better than Mayer, and why? I mean, I guess it's cool. It's cool to like Kincaid better than Mayer right now. I was on him from the get-go. Maybe you were too. But Mayer below Musgrave. Can you elaborate on that?
So, I mean, Michael Mayer is going to be tremendous for whatever NFL team gets him, because he's got, the size that a lot of these guys do, but he's also, he has room to grow as a blocker, but he's already very good at it. But, he is much more of that traditional inline, just prototypical tight end that you could probably play historically through, most of, the recent eras of professional football, and he'll function just fine. But what we look for fantasy purposes is not quite that guy. When I see somebody like a Michael Mayer, I think about somebody that we discussed earlier, Hunter Henry, where it's like, yes, obviously very good athlete, but, the scope of his responsibilities are, things that matter more for an actual football team than your fantasy football team. And the other disappointing thing about Mayer was the fact that he just did not test very well athletically at the NFL Combine.
Which we kind of knew was going to happen, right? We kind of knew that.
Yeah. So, like, not to double count that against him or anything. And also, listeners, if you're doing your own evaluations and stuff, never double count things against players. It's the only way. Like, it's terrible process. If you didn't know, then you learn something new. But if you already knew, then what the heck are you doing to yourself?
Right.
But yeah, with Mayer, I just think of him as the type of guy that, like, he could just be a little bit bland, dependent on touchdowns in most of the systems that he finds himself in. But a guy like Musgrave, now, he effectively only played about 18 games in college. I mean, his freshman year, he played a couple games, didn't really do a whole lot, whatever. But the last 3 years he was at Oregon State, like, just injuries, man. It sucks, but it was the reality of it. But when I saw him at, running some of those drills at the Senior Bowl on video, I didn't get to fly down for this one, but I watched a lot of that. I also watched the game. He was super good at all that stuff. And I look at him, and he's like stupid fast for a guy that big too. I think it was like a 4'6", 140 at that size.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's incredible. That vertical threat that can just like run, oh my gosh, that's the type of thing. And we're talking for fantasy purposes, that's the archetype that I'm going to bet on more And also just, like we'd mentioned, relative athletic score. The correlation between super high relative athletic scores and super effective fantasy tight ends, like it's there, folks. It's there. And Musgraves was obscenely high.
I still root for him. I think he's got a shot in the second round, especially if the Packers make this deal with the Jets where they get the 2 second-round picks. I think Musgrave to Green Bay is interesting there in the second round. The last question I want to get to tonight before I want to get into the CH Herms experience on social media and the internet. Jaden Reed from Michigan State. Herms, you are higher on him than a lot of your Draft Sharks colleagues. Can you tell us a little bit why fantasy owners should be higher on Jaden Reed than they actually are right now?
Full transparency, because I'm a man of honesty. Evaluating the running back position is my bag. I feel very good about doing that. When it comes to some of the receiver stuff, not to say don't listen to me, but, I haven't been able to go super deep with some of these guys as I have focusing on the running back position. So I fully acknowledge I am aggressively high on Jaden Reed. And part of that, again, just being completely honest, kind of just has to do with the fact that he reminds me a bunch of Deontay Johnson. I am a Steelers fan. It's a very similar athletic profile. It's a similar production profile. Did a lot of cool stuff contributing on special teams. He plays a little bit bigger than his, frame suggests. And, operating as a slot receiver, he could do some fun, create his own space, create his own yards. Like, it reminds me of Deontay. When I look at him, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to believe that he could end up being that guy. So that's honestly what it is.
I totally get it, and it makes perfect sense. Herms, this was tremendous, and I feel like I'm with all the viewers and the listeners tonight. I want to crave more CH Herms analysis. What's the best places to go to get more CH Herms content?
Well, if you want to follow me on the Twitter machine, you can do so at Herms NFL. That is where I tweet all of my musings and occasionally things about football. But if you want to get deep into my football brain, you have to go to draftsharks.com. That is where you can find all of my analysis. We'll be getting back and doing more of the podcast soon, doing some stuff more over at the YouTube channel. We have a ton of great stuff over there for you to check out at draftsharks.com.
Herms, this was awesome. We got to have you back on again. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, dude.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting you ready for the upcoming baseball season with a Better Baseball preview from fantasy baseball to Major League Baseball betting and the newest baseball cards of 2023. Access our exclusive content for free right now. BettorSports.com, featuring some of the best baseball minds in the industry. Adam Ronis, Ray Flowers, Kyle Elfrink, and Cody Decker. Get player profiles, prop bets, futures, sleepers, and busts, fantasy baseball strategy, collectibles, and more at no cost. Please register with your name and email at bettorsports.com right now. Get instant access plus notifications when new features are released. Go to bettorsports.com and sign up for the Better Baseball preview. Listen, I want to thank CH Herms. I want to thank Bennett Carroll, our producer tonight. We're back 7-6 Central next Thursday. Check out myffpc.com. The inaugural Superflex Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. The Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, where you can win up to $25,000 is live. The Fantasy Pros Tournament, where you can win $1 million. MyFFPC.com is live. Adoption Dynasty Orphans there as well. And the early bird special is there, myffpc.com. Check that out. Don't miss out on that. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He's CH Herms at Herms NFL from Draft Sharks. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week. Garrett Price and Dynasty Nerds is up next. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We appreciate it.